Welcome back to another episode of Rate My Cold Call. And each week we pick a real cold call, we break it down, and we give some feedback. We try not to we try not to hurt people's feelings, but we do give real feedback so you all can get better. We've all been a place where we've been trying to get better at cold calls, and that's what we're doing here. And today we have Brian. Brian, if you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself, and we'll dive into it.
Yeah, appreciate you having me, Morgan. Super excited to be here. I'm an account executive in mid market at Gong and have been in SaaS sales now for about 6 years.
Awesome, man. Well, let's dive into it, and let's get into this cold call, and let's break it down.
Hello.
Hi, hello. I know you're expecting my call. Do you have a moment to speak? I promise I'll be brief.
I'm sorry. I'm expecting your call.
No, you're not expecting my
Oh.
call. Sorry. Do you have a moment? I promise to be brief.
Sure. Yeah. What's going on?
All right, let's dive into it. So that was the introduction, Brian. What's your take so far?
Yeah, I think just starting maybe even more confidently, I might start instead of just saying, I know you weren't expecting my call, I'll be brief, just giving a tiny bit of like context or getting a yes first. So I might say something like, hey, is this Morgan? Hey, Morgan, it's Brian over at Gong. How have you been? Just to get a little bit of like excitement and energy before you go for that like permission based opener.
Do you feel like because the tone was of confusion that it led to more confusion there?
Yes, I think that's fair to say.
Okay. And then you mentioned the permission based opener. It sounds like you like doing that as the second piece of your opener, not the first part. So talk a little bit more about that for people that are listening in.
Yeah, I always like to start first with just like confirming their name, hopefully getting like a yes, getting a little bit of like excitement and energy across the line. So I'd probably start with like, hey, is this Morgan? Hey, Morgan, this is Brian over at Gong. How have you been? Just get a little bit of enthusiasm first, and then you can go for that permission based opener. I think why that permission based opener is really important is you want to get their buy-in before you go for any sort of pitch, especially if it's going to range of 20, 30, 40 seconds. You're very likely to get hung up on if you just start rambling and somebody picked up not expecting your call.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I'm always curious when we have people on, like what their take is on this. What is your take on the 27 seconds intro? You in for it, or you're not about it?
Uh, I'll say this. I think there's a lot of different styles, a lot of different talk tracks that work up front. I think ultimately I
Mm,
would take a hard look in the mirror as yourself, as a cold caller, as a seller for like which one you feel like gives you that confidence and energy to deliver on. There's been a lot of different A/B tests on different talk tracks, different permission
of
based
course.
openers. And funny enough, they all have pretty similar outcomes. It's more about how you say it, your confidence, your tone on the other line. I'm all for it. I say personally, just to be a little bit more specific and a little bit of a pattern interrupt versus 30 seconds. But I think now, conversely, a lot of buyers are used to being asked for 27 seconds. So we might need to come up with a new number count on this one here.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think it's been beaten to death too much. All right, before we go into the next part of the call, what would you rate this intro?
I'd give it a 5 or 6. I think ultimately got to the point right of success in terms of getting their permission to continue on with the call. But I think you can start it on an even stronger tone. So I would just challenge that there could be more of an opportunity to make a few small tweaks that could impact whether the meeting's actually booked or not.
Cool. All right, so we got the breakdown there. That's the intro. Let's get into the rest of the call. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, so I'm looking to understand a little bit better if you guys deal with heat treatments in your company. Is that something that you would know by any chance?
Yeah, we definitely do.
Okay. Would you happen to know if one of those heat treatments in particular is with induction heating?
It is.
Great, great. Could you maybe tell me a little bit more about what kind of parts or work pieces do you treat with induction heating?
Hey, I'm sorry. I'm kind of confused here. Who are you and what company you calling with?
Sure. So I'm actually calling from a company called we're a software simulation company, and we deal with companies like yours to streamline their processes when it comes to induction heating.
Yeah, okay. So that was the value prop there. I felt like that was a little bit of an interrogation. I don't know how you felt, but what was your take on this?
I think putting myself in the prospect's shoes, right? They suddenly pick up their cell phone. They're not expecting a call. They're starting to get hit with these kind of specific questions around heat treatment and what that specifically looks like within their facilities. I think uh, it makes sense that he shared that he was confused and started having questions for who was on the other line. So I do think it would be important just to provide a little bit more context up front, and I might kind of reconfigure how I went about the 27-second pitch per se.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think the basis is like making it a conversational flow as much as you can, right? And try to get more out of that. So obviously the prospect is like, all right, I already didn't want to be in this call in the first place. So what are some questions, or how would you have like transitioned from the intro to the value prop to get them to open up? Because they weren't given any information here.
Yeah, I like the approach in general. I think given the solution they were offering, just getting kind of a quick confirmation question versus going for the immediate long pitch. So I think he could maybe still insert that, like, hey, did you deal with some of the treatment aspects today? Great. And then I'd go into the pitch and more land the value proposition with maybe a question at the end, like, hey, the number one thing we hear from folks like you when it comes to induction heating or different complications around X, Y, and Z. How does that resonate in your world? And the reason why I'm asking is, we offer different solutions that have had X, Y, and Z benefit.
And then when you are thinking about your value prop, because you kind of you broke that down here, and he was trying to get to the point on certain things he was trying to get to. What have you found to like be really relevant in terms of your value prop? And the reason I'm asking that question is because I feel like a lot of people, when they do a cold call, they'll just say, hey, like other companies like yours, and then they don't drop the company, or it's very vague. How do you make sure that your value props are relevant across the board and not completely falling flat?
Yeah, and it's challenging, especially in my situation. We have multiple different products. There's multiple different
Right.
personas we could sell to. It could be VP of sales, could be a VP of marketing, could be someone in business development. So I think I take a little bit more of a persona based approach. If I don't have any like really in depth research, I might just share something like, hey, here in Q4, most sales leaders I'm speaking with, the number one thing they're focused on is around deal execution and closing out the year strong. Is that the number one focus in your world, Morgan, or does anything trump that as even a larger priority today? So just coming a bit more with like a point of view that's at least persona specific at a minimum.
Great. Okay, so we have that piece, we have the feedback there. Let's dive into the next component of this call.
This sounds pretty cool. I'm just going to be transparent. I'm not even in charge of like budget or spend, and I don't know how I can even get this proposed to the team. So I would just say to email someone else on the team, because I don't know anything about what we have left to spend. I don't really know too much about that.
Okay, now who would be the person in charge of the budgeting then?
So it'd be the director of engineering. His name's
All right, yeah, I think that's something we could definitely discuss further then. And all right, thank you for your time.
Okay, so he got hit with that objection. What would have been a better way to handle that one?
Yeah, I was surprised. I do like the confident ask for like, hey, who controls the budget? But I don't know if that's ultimately where you want to get to, because assuming they provide a name,
Yeah.
then the call's kind of over. It's like, okay, I'll shoot them an
Mm.
email. As long as they're still a persona you would ultimately want to set a meeting with, I'd ask a more like conversational question first. Like, hey, Morgan, completely understand when I made this call, like, you're not the one that owns the budget, likely signs for things. Totally understand that. Curious, have you ever evaluated different solutions in the past over the last 3 years of working there? Just getting a little bit more of a conversation flowing around like how evaluations work, who all would be involved in them. And then you can make a strong recommendation. Say, hey, Morgan, totally understand that you're not the one finalizing the budgets. With that expectation, I'd love to still get your perspective to know first, would this even be valuable to XYZ company? And if so, can kind of talk through what that would look like to facilitate any future conversations from there. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, I love that piece. And when I think, we kind of laugh about it, like directly asking for the budget is very very bold statement and question, right? Sometimes you may not get the answer there. When you think about objections as a whole, like if we're taking a step back, are you always going the method of asking a question to clarify, then get an answer, or do you come right away and say, boom, I already have the answer? I know it depends on the scenario, but what are ways or a framework that you have when you handle objections, just so you're at ease and you don't feel like you have pressure on you?
Yeah, great call. I absolutely do have a framework for that. I think the problem I see most commonly is most sellers get trained on how to objection handle the main
Mm,
five objections like budget or timing or not the right person, etc. But the problem is when somebody on the other line's up a call out of the blue, oftentimes the objection they give isn't completely real or baked out or fully explained. They might just be trying to get you off the phone. So I don't think you really have a full understanding of that objection just from the first time you hear it. For that reason, before I go to quote unquote handle the objection, I always want to learn more about it first. So if they shared something like, hey, unfortunately, we have no budget for something like this over the next 6 months, I'd say, hey, thanks for sharing that. You said no budget over the next 6 months. That's all you have to say typically. They'll just continue on, explain a little bit more on why that is, how they go about making decisions like that. So just asking a quick question, reversing them, making it pretty concise, adding a little empathy up front, reversing them, learning more. And you can continue that process of asking those short little reverses until you feel like you have a full context. And then you can reframe how you make the ask for the meeting based on what you just learned.
yeah, no, great advice for everybody listening in. And we listened to this call, right? Ultimately, they didn't get the meeting, and kind of gave up a little bit easy there. Like I always say, like, try to go in for at least 3 times before you end up making someone upset. So, what's your rule of thumb on this? Like, someone is being a little bit, avoidant, but if you could push a little bit more, you could get the meeting. Do you have a set rule and like, hey, you'll push for 3 times and you're out like me? Or you just read the situation and you try to figure it out to at least get the close? Are you always the next step guy? Like, what's your take on this?
Yeah, it was different at the beginning. I'd share when I first started out. I did like the rule of thumb when I first started as an SDR. I think you don't necessarily always know the full context of if that is the perfect person, if that is the best company from what they're sharing. So I think just trying to be aggressive and trying to
Mhm.
learn that rejection's okay. We'd make it a goal that just don't hang up the phone in general. Don't give them an out, continue
Yeah.
making the ask. If they're willing to hear you make the ask for the fourth time, the fifth time, you're probably adding some value or some level of intrigue. So just continue on at least your first couple months in that role. I think eventually you get to a point where you might have learned some context in there. If I'm an account executive and I have a super busy schedule and I hear, hey, we have a budget freeze for a year, our tech stack doesn't integrate with yours. Uh,
Yeah.
we have a competitor that we have into a 5-year contract. I'll probably give up pretty quickly because I know that's not worth my time. But you don't necessarily know that right away when starting your career. So I'd say just continue on.
Love it. Well, as we wrap up here, before we go into the rating of what you would say for this cold call here, I know that you're on the pursuit of winning your 5th President's Club, which is pretty wild. So, congrats on that. But for the listeners here, SDRs and AEs, what would be like your number one tip or advice you give to them for people that are looking to get into President's Club?
Yeah, I think, and I'm definitely fortunate with the two companies I had worked for with Bright Edge and Gong, where there was a lot of great talent there. But typically my best advice is to not try to reinvent the wheel within your role. There's likely some top performers there, unless you're at a true startup where you're the first SDR, the first AE.
Yeah.
Learn from the best people at your organization. What I did when I came into Gong was I made a list of a couple of things I wanted to work on, like negotiation, like discovery, like rapport, like prospecting. And then I basically figured out, well, who are the best two people at negotiation? Who are the best two people at prospecting? And I wanted to learn from the best, but only at what those people do best. To use a bit of an analogy, it's like trying to super score. If anyone took the ACT out there, take the best components of the different categories and you can really put together like a complete body of work. I think over time you'll end up making it your own, and you'll put your own flair on it. But learn from the best. Mimic some of their talk tracks, and I think that's a really great starting point for new SDRs or AEs alike.
Yeah, success leaves clues. As my mentor would always say. So it's always there in each organization. Again, like unless you're starting out as a founding AE, a little bit tougher in that regard. But even the founders should have some maybe tips or tricks for you as well. So there still is success leaves clues in that scenario, and that's great advice for everybody listening in. And as we wrap up, holistically, right? Let's do 1 to 10. What would you rate this call?
I'll say a 2. Not
Okay.
gonna sugarcoat it.
You're keeping it real. Hey, keeping it real. We freaked that. Why a 2 though?
Yeah. Didn't land the meeting. I think had opportunities at each stage, from how we started the call, how we asked for permission, how we pitched, and then giving up too easily at the end. I'd give it a 2 instead of a 1, just for making it conversational. And obviously the prospect delivered some feedback that it seemed interesting and intriguing. But ultimately our job at the end of the day is to book meetings, and anything short of that, especially if there is an opportunity where someone's excited about it, interested, and they could be the right person, it's on us to convert those at a higher clip than that.
Yeah. Good stuff, man. Well, Brian, appreciate you hopping on the episode. For everybody listening in, hopefully you found this to be insightful, helpful in your role moving forward. And if you're going on a Presence Club, take Brian's advice. Go talk to the top rep. I know that, everyone know people are hybrid nowadays, but I remember taking the top SDR, top AE out to lunch when I started, and that was one of the most helpful conversations I had. So hopefully you'll take that advice. You'll take the advice from the cold call, and you can take this to make some meetings and get some things done. And we appreciate y'all listening, and see you on the next one. Cheers.